Ukrainian units across the front line are clamoring for the most advanced ground robots. But it's not the governments of Europe, the United States, or even Ukraine who are funding them. Instead, it is you guys who are putting these ground robots in the hands of the units who need them the most. We are going to take a look at UAO's latest fundraiser and the ground drones that the units have asked for and that you guys have delivered on. Just why are they so sought after by these units? And just what can they bring to the battlefield that existing technology can't match? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. Okay, so this is actually a type of drone that was requested by the units. It's called the Targon, and the Targon is a word for cockroach. But once we talk about the technical capabilities of this and we take a look at some of the exclusive footage of these guys in action, you're going to see exactly why they have this name. Now, this is developed in country by Ukrainian engineers and approved by the Ministry of Defense. So this isn't a speculative tech. This is something that the Ukrainian MOD has green lit. And the Targon is so small it can be transported in a van or on a car trailer and can carry up to 440 pounds of cargo, right? It can transport ammunition, food, or equipment. And in a pinch, it can actually transport a person as well. But it has a quiet electric motor and large rubber wheels. It can move stealthily across the battlefield over long distances. I'd be very curious, but because it seems to be electrically powered, it's unlikely to generate the kind of heat signature that even thermal drones are going to be able to detect and zero in on when it's, for example, a person, right? Now, the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense wants to ramp up production of these drones, among other technology, hopefully this year. But and the units in the fight, they're not going to wait for the Ukrainian government to ramp this up. Instead, they've said, listen, they've gone to Targon personally and said, can we purchase these drones for our people? And the answer is yes. Targon's like, yeah, because if you've ever run a business, you understand that sales today fund operations tomorrow. And so if Targon wants to build 1 million of these drones, right, or 100,000 of these drones next year, it needs to get money to purchase plants, equipment, hire workers, get raw materials, and it's got to do all of that, right, with existing funding. So for a lot of them, they say, listen, we can't build these 100,000 drones. We don't have it. So we need money today. And sales today fund operations in the future. And so we said, listen, UAO said, listen, the units want these drones. You guys want to do sales. Let's purchase some. So we're going to take a look first off at Yuri, who you might remember from the previous, today, from our earlier Ukraine videos and our Ukraine trip. He's going to narrate for us a little bit of these drones. This is them in a trailer. And you can see, we're going to listen in on why the units find these so valuable. Just take a listen.
UAO purchased 10 ground drones of company Targon, 2 of them for 150 kilos load and 5 of them for 150 kilo loads and 5 of them for 350 kilos loads. So these drones have brought...
okay, you can see the 5 in the back here. These are the heavy drones. Look like they come with a spare tire. These are the lighter model drones. But it looks like we've got a 5 and 5 mix between the heavy lift and the lighter lift. But you see, they're not that much different, right? You're talking about a difference between about, sounds like about 500 pounds to about 350 pounds.
By that company. And today we're giving 2 drones to one of the good battalions who defend in Ukraine in the north. And their logistics really under constant attack of the Russian fiber optics drones.
Okay, so this is, I think, an interesting point. These drones, their primary function, as we just read, is in logistics. It's moving supply, ammunition, food, water, medical supplies, and other life essentials to units on the front lines, because the Russian combat effort and frankly the Ukrainian defensive effort have both focused on logistics interdictions, right? Starving the front line of material before anything can get there. And this has been one of the reasons that the pace of advance has been absolutely glacial, is because simply getting units to the front line, to the fight, is almost impossible. Again, we saw this personally when we went to Ukraine and we tried to visit a headquarters position, not even a zero line position, but just getting there, we had to turn around because, again, we got literally strafed by a Russian drone. We were close enough to the FPV that we could hear it buzzing overhead, searching for us while we had to hide in a house. So, right, that is just emblematic of how things are now, right? Getting to the forward line of troops is almost impossible. And so when you have to imagine trying to gather the men and materials for an offensive in that kind of environment, it's very, very difficult and very, very costly in terms of lives.
Russian artillery, Russian rockets, and even helicopters and planes coming. So it's often very difficult to give some supplies to the guys who are sitting at the front line, and they covering, one group of Ukrainian soldiers covers over 1.2, 1.5 kilometers of the positions.
Again, that is a crazy ask for some of these individual troops, where they'll sit there and say, okay, there's one position, but it's covering 1.5 kilometers. But that sounds crazy until you think it through. You say, listen, well, the thing is, a lot of these Ukrainian positions, one, think of them as being sort of smattered throughout the battlefield. Don't think of them as like World War I style true trenches. They're smatterings of positions. They're very well concealed. And the idea is that the units exist primarily to conduct delaying operations, right? To sort of hold the ground so the Russians can't take it. And the idea is that primarily the role of eyes and ears are filled by drones, and drones are going to see and detect enemy formations moving into position, advancing on a given position. And then it'll be expected that the command will either reinforce a position or order that position to fall back to an existing defensive line, depending on sort of the larger battlefield situation. And so, but you see that keeping these positions supplied is so important, because if that position gets detected, right, Russian artillery, Russian drones, all kinds of the full Russian arsenal is going to come to bear on that individual position, that right? And a position could be 6 guys, right? And so you've got 6 guys in a bunker holding out, and being constantly searched for by Russian drones. And so every time you send a supply vehicle to them, you're putting that it's a big vehicle, it's loud, it makes a lot of noise, right? Drivers can only drive in daylight, right? And this collectively ends up being a tremendous, tremendous risk, because again, remember, those positions, if you want to get supplies to them, you're drawing a line right to the position. And so these drones solve all of those problems.
So they hold it, and artillery and other means like drones helping them to do that. So that's why it's very necessary to have drones at night or at some time to come and deliver supplies, bring out wounded, bring out dead, and even take enemy prisoners and bring them to Ukrainian justice. So that's, as you could see, the drones are very good. The price of a smaller drone is about $4,000, and bigger drone is about $6,500, and it's such a constant use. These drones have some armor plates around.
So you see that $4,000 is unfeasibly expensive for a Ukrainian unit, even that's doing self-fundraising, right? Remember, one of the things that we heard is that the Ukrainian government provides a minimum of equipment to these brigades and battalions, and instead it falls on the soldiers themselves to either crowdfund or fundraise internally for additional gear. But remember, the Ukrainian government's going to issue them a standard rifle, no sights. It's going to issue them plate carriers, and it's going to issue them the ammunition they need to do the fight. But the drones, the equipment, the additional protection, all of that falls on the unit. And $4,000 in Ukraine is a tremendous amount of money for them. But through our collective efforts, right, it is feasible to put 10 plus drones into the battlefield. And this is why I wanted to take a sec and talk about the fundraiser that made this possible, which is the Double Down fundraiser, right? Obviously, there's been a huge shift in the U.S. posture towards Ukraine, but that doesn't, our government anyway, but it doesn't mean that Americans or the world is abandoning Ukraine, right? That's the thing with American democracy, is that you don't have an ally in the White House. You have an ally in the American people, and we still are Ukraine's allies. So an anonymous Dutch donor has said, I will pledge matching donations up to $250K, right? So if the Americans and others can step up, I will match it. So that's why this is a huge goal, is to try to take advantage of that full fundraising pledge, right? And we are so close, guys. So if you want to buy more of these ground drones for these units, right? This is life-saving stuff, guys, because these drones, again, the alternative is to have a Ukrainian soldier sitting behind the wheel of a truck, driving through the night or driving in broad daylight, trying to get these supplies to units on the front, right? So the link is in the description. Of course, guys, one of the units that is benefiting from this fundraiser, because obviously at this scale, it's not just buying drones, it's buying night vision goggles, FPV drones, jammers, specialty shotguns to take out drones, all of these kinds of things, all of these sorts of gear these units need, and a whole bunch of different units. But the GRU, or the GUR, has pledged, put up some patches. If you guys donate, I think up to $250, right, you'll get the GRU patch. This is badass. They are like the equivalent of Ukraine's Special Activities Division of the CIA. Very secretive, very clandestine, and very, very good at their job. So if you want to have one of those badass patches you can get and know that you got it by putting up for the Ukrainians, you want to check the link in the description and contribute to that Double Down fundraiser. Okay, let's get back to Yuri.
That is why they very impenetrable for enemy drone attacks. So the record is 18 enemy flying drones, BPLA, attacked one of these big platform, and it was still coming back, and it still worked.
So that is the story right there. To me, that illustrates it. Is that, 17 in the greatest case, 17 attack drones targeted this individual armored drone, and it shook them off and still made it back. You have to think, guys, 17 drones, especially when you're talking about things like fiber optic drones, which can't be jammed electronically, right? Just being able to shuck these things off and still get the logistics to their target position is pretty incredible. All right. And 17 is probably an unusually high number. But even if you say, hey, this thing can shuck off 5 to 7 drones, right? If it can shuck off even 3 good direct hits and still get supplies to the position, that is a game changer, right? Because you have to think, normally, even if you hit a van or a truck, that truck is going to be disabled, right? So now, not only, so you in the truck scenario, one FPV drone, let's say it's not even that successful, doesn't kill or injure the driver, doesn't destroy the material, but it still hits a truck, and trucks don't have a lot of spare stuff to keep going, right? So one drone knocks out one truck, and then it's stuck there on the fly. And your options are send another truck to recover it, another driver, another truck, and the Russians aren't stupid. They're watching with reconnaissance drones to look for that recovery truck, and they're going to hit that too, right? And so you're talking about 17 drones. Let's be generous and say takes out 10 trucks, right? Or 5 trucks. And some of those drivers will be wounded or KIA. The alternative is these drones, where 17, right? 17 FPV drones, maybe going to take out 2 drones. And remember, at $4,000 a pop, it's still cheaper than a pickup truck, right? You can still buy 2 used pickup trucks, 3 used pickup trucks potentially for the price of one of these drones. So you see, the math is a no-brainer. This is why these units are clamoring for these things. This is why they're like, listen, if you can help us out with these, we really need them. It's obvious. It saves the lives of the people in position. It saves the lives of their logistics teams. It saves pickup trucks and other valuable gear. And it forces the Russians to burn their most valuable FPV drones. Remember, a fiber optic FPV drone costs almost $1,000 to $2,000 to produce, right? Maybe even more. And so if they burn 3 FPV drones on this and they're fiber optic drones, it's an obvious win, right? Financially, it drains the Russians more than it drains the Ukrainians. This is why this stuff is just like, I mean, this is why these systems, this is why they're called cockroaches, guys, because they just never die. And they skitter around the battlefield. They're hard to detect. They operate only at night. They run really cold. They're just resilient in a way that pickup trucks cannot be.
So that's why we choose this company for now, and maybe if we have your support, we obtain more of these drones, because we already have the request of several units which we're gonna deliver. So this drones is the north of Ukraine, north part of the front. Then we have some drones which will go to Kharkiv area. Some of them go to Donetsk area. So thank you for your support, and Slava Ukraini, and thank you for your help, for your very much important assistance and support.
Okay. I want to take a look. They also sent me a couple of videos of the drones actually in action. And I want to just show you guys kind of how these drones kind of run. They're quick videos, but it really does capture just how effective these can be. So this is one of the, I think it's actually one of the soldiers showing how the drone can be used to evacuate a casualty. And this is, the smaller of the drones, right? And you see that again. The thing to remember here is that while this feels like you have to be evacuated somehow, and a truck or a Bradley, right? Do you think the average battalion has a Bradley, particularly one that can shuck off an FPV drone? No. And that might take hours and hours, right? If you are wounded, remember, there is the rule of the golden hour, which says that if you can get to a casualty collection point, if you can get to a medical treatment facility within 60 minutes of you being wounded, the odds of you dying of that wound drop by something like 85%. And so the best CASEVAC technique is the one that you can do immediately, right? Yeah, if you wait days for a Bradley, but guys may not make it. So you have someone like this, you can say, listen, this dude's wounded at night. In a couple hours, you are going to throw you on this, and the drone is going to navigate you back to a safety, right? And there's going to be no other soldiers at risk. It's not going to provide a ton of heat, so it's not going to glow in thermals the way it normally would. And again, if you were a soldier, you might give them one of those thermal blankets to help conceal their body heat and send them on their way. So this ability to quickly evacuate a casualty, maybe not comfortably, but that's okay. But look at the level of maneuverability and the power from this again, listen to the noise. You don't hear a motor at all because there isn't one.
Без ругательств. Дима, без ругательств. Прости, Юр.
Right. You see, it's got a lot of power, it's got a lot of maneuverability, and a lot of torque in those tires. Because remember, it's not about going fast. If this thing can cover 20 kilometers, 10 kilometers out, 10 kilometers back, right, it is going to be far enough away to deter a lot. I'm going to say 85, 90% of the risk of the drone risk. And artillery, right, risk remains low, right? Aircraft risk remains low. And again, you have to think that in this war, a target has to be worth the ammunition you're expending on it. One guy in a basically a glorified wagon is not going to be worth that much ammunition, right? The Russians aren't going to throw that much at it. Contrast that to a Bradley, right? Where the Russians will say, damn, they're deploying a Bradley. Throw 100 FPV drones at it. Nobody ever said, damn, they're deploying a shopping cart. Throw 100 drones at it.
Треба, щоб не видно було окружаюче, або закривати потім. Бо я так знімаю, щоб землю більше було видно. Отак він їде, дивіться. Отак, отак.
Right, you see how this thing can actually navigate pretty smartly over some terrain. I would love to know more about how it sees and senses the world, but it's really an interesting, and because it is behind the lines, right? Because it is for logistics to the front, you don't have to worry about jammers because there's no Russian jammers forward of Russian positions. So you can have this kind of a relatively stable connection and not worry that much about jamming. I am so curious about how this thing sees. But look at it. Look at it. It can really cover some rough terrain. Again, if you can get troops to a position, this thing can get to a position. So again, let's take a look at a couple of other interesting ones. Let's see. We've got, of course, there's the drone without any equipment in it. But you saw how maneuverable it remained even with a whole person in there. So imagine, again, you can fit 500 pounds. I mean, that's so much water, food, ammunition, medical supplies, right? You can literally, we used to call them speedballs in the military, where you'd say, listen, we have a default package. We say, listen, you don't need to tell us what you need. In an emergency, in a firefight, we say, listen, we're going to just palletize everything we think you might need in a firefight, right? And we are going to have it ready to roll so that when you ask, when you say just send it, we don't need to sit there and be like, quick, grab 2 boxes of ammunition, 223, grab 3 belts of 762, and they said they need 3 gallons of water, so threw that in here, quick, pack it, no, stack it a different way, right? You don't want to have to do that while your guys are getting cooked. So you pre-palletize everything in a way that you can drop it onto, in this case, the drone, but in our case in Afghanistan, it was a helicopter or an MRAP, and we'd say, listen, you just throw it in there. You don't worry about it. Maybe they don't need water. Too bad. The water's already ready to go. You're getting what you get. And so they push that out. It's a push logistics. And while that's hard, that's inefficient to do for an entire military, in a moment of crisis, it is very efficient. And the appeal of something like this is that you could easily create these speedballs to say, listen, we know 80% of what you guys are going to need. You're going to need water. You're going to need food, right? Because you're human beings. And you're going to need ammunition. We have a sense of what about you guys are running. And so we'll just toss it all in to a standard package, drop it on this drone, and out the door it goes, right? And you can see this thing has a lot of torque and a lot of power. I'm so curious to know how much thinking it does, right? How much of this is like an FPV drone where it's guided by a person, which again, a person in a safe situation is in a bunker, 20 kilometers from the front line is a world of difference from a human being driving this thing. Or if it has some level of self-sensor that can detect terrain and other sort of things that might not get projected from onto a screen that an operator was doing. So again, really interesting stuff. We just got one more. I just want to show you guys the drone loading just to see how delicate the drone can be. You see there.
Зараз поправ Сашу. Та й приходить. Я зловлю його, якщо що.
Right. That is a pretty precision amount. I mean, look at this. The ramp here isn't any wider than the tires. So you see that this thing can be very delicate, very precise, and it's loading into a standard cargo van. So you see how... And the funny thing is, you see he's maneuvering it pretty well. It's not that heavy in the grand scheme of things.
Давай там його розвернемо. А він розвернеться. Саш, давай розвернемо, щоб він не качався. Отак,
А він
поперек.
зараз цей не буде качатися.
Буде. Як відключиш, буде качатися.
А вы выйдете, я поставлю.
Ні, так його лучше отак, чи поперек, щоб не качався.
Поперек?
Ну, ти як виключиш, він вже буде качатися.
Коробочка пустая, чи
Ні.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So they were talking about the fact that it starts to move on its own a little bit. Okay. So it must have some level of kind of AI or machine learning kind of guiding it, probably in a basic way. It's probably like a drone where, you can tell a reconnaissance drone, go here, go to this grid, go to that grid. And it kind of infers from, it kind of figures out how to get there on its own. But the fascinating thing is, again, a drone flying through the air, basically, if you're a drone, statistically, there is almost no obstacle that you're going to run into if you're flying above about 100 feet, right? Almost no chance. Whereas this ground drone, it's all obstacles. Everything is obstacles. And a military position, by definition, is going to want to be in a lot of cover and a lot of concealment. So it is going to be both hard to see, and it's going to be hard to get to. So that's why these ground drones are some of the biggest innovations on the battlefield. Anyway, guys, that is all I had. Be sure to check us out down at the Double Down Fundraiser. Thanks to James Sterling, Steve Moran, Doug Beck, Alan Knutson, Bastian Himmeling, Brian Kelly, Del McCombs, Jay Zola, Henry Roussier, all of our Lieutenant Tier members. I could not do this without you guys. I appreciate you all so much, and I will see you in the next one. Cheers.